Tucson police had captured nearly all members of the bank-robbing Terror Gang. Only injured John Hamilton was still at large, but he was in no shape to help. Harry Pierpont, Charles Makeley, and Russell Clark had been arraigned in Lima, Ohio for the death of Sheriff Jess Sarver, while John Dillinger had been arraigned in Crown Point, Indiana for the death of Sergeant William Patrick O'Malley. But all incarcerated gangsters had escaped before, and all vowed to try again. I am Yvette, this is Defragged History. Thank you for tuning in to episode 6 of the story of John Dillinger, how it started, how it ended, and everything in between. John Dillinger and his merry men were wiped from the front pages, and once the legal machine was done, they'd be wiped from the face of the earth in mere months. The justice system moved much faster in those days. On the newspaper's inside pages, readers could still find reports about the gang's arraignments, legal maneuvers, jury selection, and the occasional question of a breakout. But everyone in Crown Point, Indiana was sure Dillinger couldn't escape. The outlaw was safely tucked away on the second floor in the new escape-proof section of the Lake County Jail. The building was secured like a fort, and at night, floodlights lit up the place like a Christmas tree. Any rescuers would have to battle dozens of regular jailers, members from the Farmers Protective Association, and a squad of National Guardsmen. Locals joked that even the great escape artist Harry Houdini couldn't get out of Crown Point, let alone some two-bit bank robber. While the state was rushing to execute him, John Dillinger, who spent most days alone in his barred cell with its simple bed and a small bucket for a toilet, remained good-humored and upbeat. Big Brother wrote his 14-year-old half-sister Doris that now Sheriff Hawley allowed visitors, he would sure like to see all of them. He asked how half-sister Frances liked school. Does Dad let you and Frances go to the show, movies, as often as I used to take you? He apologized for not taking them all to the Chicago World's Fair, but it had been extended, and they should go this summer. It would be bigger and better this year. Then, wistfully, I wish you kids could see the country I've seen the last few months. It would sure have been a treat to you. He thanked his sister for being such a big help to their aging father. He advised his half-brother Hubert not to quit his job, since jobs were so scarce these days. Tell everyone hello and love to all from your brother Johnny. The guards at the jail thought Dillinger was a good lad. John kept complimenting them for the good job they were doing, patting them on the back and telling them what fine fellows they were. Also, he was surprisingly dim, certainly not as smart as everyone thought. When John volunteered to do the distasteful odd jobs, the guards no longer saw the man who carried the slop jars of human waste every day as a celebrity or a public enemy. They even felt a little sorry for Johnny, who so yearned to be with his family. All in all, Dillinger was just another pathetic, lonely, dim-witted criminal. Listeners, this was all an act. The moment John stepped foot inside the jail, he went Illusion 100. He turned on the charm and put on a pathetic act to disarm his jailers. Figuratively, because guards weren't allowed to have guns in the jail section. I played the good fella with all the guards at the jail. I joked and wisecracked with them. I fed them a lot of soft talk and tried to make them think I wasn't half as smart as they were. All jailers like soft talk. It puffs them up. The Crown Point jailers were no exception. John used the money he got from his father to pay Sam Cahoon, the 64-year-old janitor and handyman, to overnight him magazines, candy, shoe polish, shoelaces, and cigarettes. Oddly, the shoe shine bottle slowly emptied, but his shoes weren't shined. He did relace his shoes, though. John passed around the cigarettes to the other prisoners and struck up conversations with them, casually inquiring with the local crooks about the roads in the area. He also asked the new arrivals how many guards they saw outside. You know, completely normal stuff, if someone were thinking of an escape. We've once more arrived at the point in any of my history series where I must inform you of the following. History is messy. There may be plenty of information, but because eyewitness accounts are flawed, also many contradictions. However, I have yet to see a more contradictory telling of events than what transpired next. So, here's what I gather happened. For sources, check the link below. Also, while you're down there, subscribe. Saturday, March 3rd, 1934, was a rainy and chilly day. At the Crown Point Jail, after breakfast at about 8:15 a.m., John Dillinger and the 14 other prisoners in the criminal cell block started their exercise routine in the corridors. Exercise was walking up and down the hall. John was humming a tune. Guard Winfred Bryant was stationed at the so-called crow's nest, overlooking the corridors from behind glass. At about 8:45 a.m., Janitor Cahoon arrived at the cell block to let in a crew of trustees carrying soap, toilet paper, and cleaning supplies, so the prisoners could do some housekeeping. Cahoon pulled a lever in a metal box on the corridor wall to open the barred door to the cell block. A second pull would open the cell doors, but the prisoners were still exercising. Actually, Sam was early. Too early. He normally waited for the prisoners to be locked in the day room. Cahoon called Brian down to help him with the steel door. When that door opened, Dillinger elbowed 2 trustees carrying supplies aside, pushed Cahoon against a control box, and jammed a pistol under his chin. John said, "Close the door. Now this is pretty serious. I don't want to kill anybody or don't want to have any shooting here, but you have got to do what I say or I will have to kill you." Cahoon said, "What's the matter, John? Haven't we been good to you?" "Never mind." Guard Bryant in the doorway watched the scene unfold, stunned. How did Dillinger get a weapon, and why was he struggling to hold on to it? But before he could do anything, it made Herbert Youngblood approached him, ominously wielding the handle of a toilet plunger. Youngblood, an African-American awaiting trial for the murder of a fruit peddler, had been seen whispering with Dillinger for the past few days. The man was electric chair bound, and John could trust him to give his life to escape. Did Bryant have a gun? No. Youngblood ushered the guard and the 2 trustees into the number 2 cell. When Cahoon wanted to join them, Dillinger stopped him. "Not you. You stay out here. I have use for you. You're gonna take me out of here." He ordered Cahoon to lock and unlock cells and doors, locking the prisoners in, and while the man worked the levers, Dillinger fired questions at him. "How many doors to the outside?" 4. "How many guards?" "I don't know. I guess 10 or 12. Dillinger had to make like Pokemon and catch them all. John Dillinger pushed Sam Cahoon through the cell block door, across the platform, down 4 steps past the landing, and up the 4 steps on the north side into the main building. He crouched down and saw a man crossing between rooms. Who's that? That would be Ernest Blunk, the 32-year-old deputy sheriff and fingerprint man. "Call that fellow back, I want to see him." "Oh, Blunk, come here a minute." The unarmed deputy left 3 prisoners he was in the middle of fingerprinting in the receiving room and walked over. When he got to the end of the corridor, he noticed someone hiding behind the janitor. "Dillinger." John quickly flashed a gun that looked like a .45 and growled, "I've got it on you. You haven't got a chance. Do as you're told and nobody gets hurt." The deputy looked for an escape on his right, but there was Youngblood with a raised stick ready to strike. Blunk was locked in cell 2 with the others and said, "I'll kill the son of a bitch now for sure." Dillinger brought Cahoon back to the corridor and told him to call for the warden, Lou Baker, but the janitor said, "I'm sorry, John, but this has gone far enough. Shoot me if you have to, but I've done all I can for you." Youngblood prepared to rearrange the old man's teeth, but Dillinger stopped him. "None of that. I'll handle this." He took Cahoon back to the cell block. Sam said, "We'll kill you before you get halfway down the hallway. Watch me." Dillinger shoved Cahoon into cell 2, hauled Deputy Blunk out, and brought him to the foyer. "How many guards out front?" "Dunno." "How many Tommies in the office?" "Dunno." "Where are the keys to the cars?" "Dunno." "Where are the keys to the jail?" "Dunno." "Locked up, or with the warden or the sheriff." "Let's go and see what you can see." Dillinger sent Blunk down the 100-foot corridor alone to call Warden Baker, while he hunched by the steps to remain out of sight. Some believed Blunk could have ducked for cover, but he didn't, and yelled, "Lou, come back here a minute." Warden Baker hollered he was busy. Blunk moved back down the corridor. A minute later, Trustee John Cowell-Lizzen, who had a full set of keys, opened the steel door between the main office and the reception room for the warden. Blunk beckoned Baker. The warden entered the cell block, stepping over the dropped cleaning supplies, when someone grabbed him by the shirt and shoved a gun in his back. "Make any dumb moves and I'll blow your head off." Dillinger. John asked Baker if he had guns, but Lou told him he wasn't allowed to carry a gun. Dillinger searched him. Nothing. Into cell 2. John apologized. "I don't like to have to do this, Mr. Baker." Baker shrugged, sat on a bunk, and asked, "Anybody got a cigarette?" One warden, one janitor, 2 trustees, and 2 guards down. Lord knows how many more guards to go. Dillinger brought Blanc back to the corridor and checked the door that led to the penal farm section, across the way from the trustee cell block. Johnny asked Ernie if there was a door from the trustee section to the jail's kitchen. Nope. Dillinger had Youngblood check. Yeah, nope. Dillinger was mighty miffed. Then I have been misinformed. He now had to go through the main building to get to the kitchen. After Johnny and Herbert hustled the 6 or so inmates from the trustee cell block into cell 2, Dillinger brought Blanc back to the steel door to the offices. Blanc called for a volunteer guard, 75-year-old Matt Brown, who was waiting on Warden Baker to give him his assignment for the day to come. Coalition opened the door and locked it again. Brown, into cell 2. Again, back to the door. Blanc called for Deputy Sheriff Butch Kenneth Houck. Houck handed his gun to Guard Marshal Keithley, who had front door guard duty. Coalition opened the door and locked it again. Houck got jumped by Dillinger, but Butch wasn't going down easy. He went for the outlaw's wrist, but he didn't stand a chance. Houck into cell 2. Again, back to the door. Blanc called for Guard Keithley. The man put his rifle and Houck's gun in the vault, but at the door, Coalition warned him. "Marshal? I think there's something funny." Keithley looked down the corridor and saw nothing weird. He told the trustee to open the door. "Keithley, into cell 2. Prison overcrowding got real." At cell 2, John Dillinger asked Guard Keithley whether anyone else was in the office. No one. "So, where were the Tommy guns?" "They're in the office." "Where are they at?" "In the office." "Where at?" "You will find them. They're in the office." The warden's office was at the front of the building. Dillinger and his supporting cast once more headed out. Unlock door, pull lever, lock door, pull lever, gate open, push lever, gate closed. John and Herbert snuck up to the steel door and hid from sight as Blanc asked Trustee Coalition to open up. When he did, Dillinger appeared and demanded the keys. Then he and Youngblood, using Blanc and Coalition as shields, moved through the passageway. Using the keys, Dillinger opened the door to the warden's office. Some reporters claimed there was a guard asleep in the office, but all who testified said no. Dillinger grabbed the Tommy guns from the windowsill and gave one to Youngblood. Herbert protested that he had never held a Thompson before, so John gave him a quick Tommy Gun 101. The crooks and their hostages explored the rest of the floor. Johnny, using the master keys, made sure to lock every door along the way so no one could jump them. Then he brought the men back to cell 2. Push lever, gate open, push lever, gate closed, unlock door, lock door. This was exhausting. Back at cell 2, Dillinger started laughing, pulled the pistol from his pocket, and raked it across the bars in front of Warden Baker. But it wasn't metal on metal, just thuds. He proudly showed off the weapon made of wood. It was missing a handle, which made it difficult to hold. Dillinger gloated, "This is how tough your little jail is. I did it all with this little wooden pistol." If they doubted him, they could search him. Cahoon answered for all. "I'll take your word for it, John." Dillinger, waving the Thompson, asked Warden Baker, "Where are the cars kept?" "In the garage, and back." "Where are the keys?" "I suppose they're in the cars." John looked at a group of fellow inmates. "Any of you want to come along?" Fred Beaver and Leslie Caron, both charged with grand larceny, and James Posey, in for an assault during a robbery, jumped at the chance. Dillinger cheerfully said, "Well, so long, boys. I'll have to be moving on." Then, with a serious face, he told Warden Baker, "I'm sorry to have to do this to you, Mr. Baker, but you can see how it is." "Yes, John, I can see how it is." So, off the group went. This time, however, Blanc, figuring they wouldn't be back, locked the steel door to the jail but didn't pull the lever all the way. The cell doors weren't entirely closed. The shortest route out of the jail was through the front door, but Team Escapee was leaving out the back door in the kitchen, the long way. On the landing, Blanc pointed to Youngblood. "This guy doesn't know how to use that Tommy, and I ain't gonna walk in front of him while the safety's off." Dillinger pushed Blanc forward. "Move!" Back in the cell block, the skinniest of the trustees managed to squeeze through the gap in the cell door. Team escapee, Deputy Blunk in front, followed by the Crook trio with the heavily armed Dillinger and Youngblood bringing up the rear, arrived at the jail's kitchen at the back of the building. John entered alone. Prison chef William Ziegler stood near a steam cooker, and two vigilantes, John Thomas and Guy Surprise, sat at a table sipping coffee. "You two, on your feet." The men, thinking John was a fellow vigilante, laughed. "Good one, pal. Get off your butts and put your hands up." "Oh crap, this is serious." Ziegler threatened he'd shove the machine gun up Dillinger's "Where the Sun Don't Shine," just as the rest of Team Escapee entered. Deputy Blunk told the men, "This is Dillinger, it's a jailbreak, just do what he tells you to." Blunk took Thomas's .45 Colt, but Surprise said he was unarmed. Youngblood frisked him, so that was a lie. He took his gun. Dillinger tried to squeeze the disarmed vigilantes and the cook into the tiny kitchen closet. They didn't fit. So John locked the cook in the closet, but not before grabbing a yellow raincoat and a cap and putting them on. Team Escapee plus two new hostages headed out through the barred back door, which was wide open because, of course. The group crossed the 20-foot courtyard to the garage, using a brick garden wall for cover. In the jail's garage, trustees John Hudick and Bub Chandler were working on a 1927 Nash touring car. There were also a Model T Ford, a 1930 Hudson sedan, and 3 motorcycles. Dillinger told his startled Hudick to get a car running and place it in the middle of the garage. Hudick looked at Blunk. "What?" The deputy told him to just do what Dillinger told him. The man started opening the garage doors leading into the street. Not what Dillinger wanted. First put the car in the middle, then open the doors. Hudick stammered that all the car keys were in the warden's office. Dillinger said, "Baker, the son of a bitch lied to me. I ought to kill him." Dillinger hustled everyone into the blanket room and left Youngblood to keep an eye on them. Then Johnny took Ernie back to the jail and brought Hudick, who claimed to know where the keys were. At about 9 a.m., National Guardsman Ward Heil and 2 deputies, Mike Miller and Philip Schreiber, stationed in the living quarters of the jail, heard a trustee mailman yelling. He'd rang the doorbell at the jail door, but there was no answer. Heil told him he had to come around back so he could let him in. Heil first knocked on the steel door that connected the living quarters to the offices. No answer. Odd. Heil went through the kitchen, which was empty. Odd. He let the trustee mailman in. He checked the warden's office. Empty. Odd. He opened a window and yelled to a fellow guardsman stationed next door at the criminal courts building, "Something's wrong!" Heil then returned to the kitchen, which wasn't empty. Inside were several trustees, Schreiber and Miller, Deputy Blunk, John Hudick, and a dude in a yellow raincoat and cap, holding a machine gun. Dillinger waved a Thompson in all their faces and all surrendered whatever weapons they carried. Everyone was locked in the receiving room. Dillinger took Blunk and Hudick into the warden's office, but the garage man couldn't find the car keys. Johnny asked Ernie, "I have to steal a car, where's the closest garage?" Blunk said the Main Street garage, 2 blocks down, just beyond the criminal courts. Moving out. In the warden's apartment, the warden's wife, Irene Baker, heard knocking at the jail's peephole in the closet. She took a peek and saw her husband. "Irene, has the car left the garage?" "What?" Baker yelled, "Call for help! Dillinger is out!" Mrs. Baker picked up the phone, but the line was dead. The lawman stationed in the living area had mysteriously vanished, and she hurried down the stairs to the kitchen, out the back door to the garage. Just then, Mrs. Mary Linton, Irene Baker's mother, returned from an errand and entered the garage. She saw a cluster of men and Dillinger. "Oh, John, you won't kill anybody, will ya?" "Not if they do what I tell them to." Irene then burst into the garage. "Oh, praise be Deputy Blunk," and a man in a raincoat she didn't recognize. "John Dillinger is out!" The man stepped toward her, a submachine gun in his hand, 2 pistols jammed into his belt, and 2 pistols in his front pockets. "Oh no, you're not Dillinger." She nearly fainted, but John grabbed her by the arm so she wouldn't fall. Blunk said, "Mrs. Baker, you do as he tells you." But the building was surrounded by heavily armed guards." Dillinger ushered Irene and her mother into the blanket room where the 3 runaway prisoners were waiting. "Don't be frightened, Mrs. Baker. We're not gonna hurt anybody. You 2 be good girls and nothing will happen to you." The 3 inmates reconsidered joining the breakout. Yeah, Mrs. Baker made a point. Armed guards everywhere. They ran back into the jail. Dillinger and the garage men disabled the cars and motorcycles. Then Udick bailed through a side door across the courtyard into the kitchen. Oh well. At about 9:15 a.m., John Dillinger and Herbert Youngblood, openly carrying machine guns, walked Deputy Sheriff Ernest Blunk about 50 yards up Southeast Street and entered the Main Street garage through the side door. Not a guard in sight. They were all out front, keeping a weather eye on a possible Dillinger rescue squad. The night mechanic Edwin Sager had stayed late to work on a Chevy. 6 workers stood near the main entrance, and 2 mechanics were working in the back. Robert Volk, a young mail carrier, had just parked his truck in the garage to spend his break with his buddies. Volk had been issued a .45 Colt automatic to guard against mail theft, but he wasn't about to mess with folks wielding machine guns. He ducked behind his truck. Dillinger asked Sager, "What's the fastest car in the joint?" Sager saw the submachine gun hanging at Dillinger's side and figured, a deputy. They'd been everywhere recently. He pointed to a black Ford V8 4-door sedan. "There's your car," and returned to work on the Chevy. Dillinger raised the gun at Ed and told him to call out the mechanics from the back. Finally, Sager understood the man with the gun was no deputy. Dillinger told the herded-up men, "Just stay quiet now, boys, and everything will be all right." Youngblood, who covered the men at the main entrance, got into the Ford's back seat, and Dillinger told Sager to get going. The mechanic protested, "I'm working here." Dillinger tapped the Tommy gun's barrel on Sager's leg. "I said, let's go." Blunk told Ed just to do as he asked, and Sager joined Youngblood in the back seat. Dillinger pulled Blunk to the driver's side of the Ford. "You drive." The deputy slid behind the wheel while Dillinger rode shotgun. He rolled down the window, stuck his Thompson out, and kept an eye on the mechanics. Blunk started the car, which had a full tank of gas, and Dillinger told one of the mechanics to open the doors. So he didn't. Another employee pressed a button and opened the garage's 2 rear doors. Blunk drove out, turned left, and then west on Joliet. Dillinger told him to ignore traffic lights. But when Ernie ran a red light and accidentally on purpose nearly hit a car, John was not amused. "If we hit somebody, I'll plug you first. Keep it at 40 and watch what you're doing. We don't want a speeding ticket." They headed north for about a mile and turned west on a gravel road toward the town of St. John. Dillinger said, "Maybe I ought to go back and tell Mrs. Hawley I'm leaving. She seemed like an awfully nice lady and I don't want her to feel hurt about all this." Seconds after the Ford left the garage, mailman Volk dialed the police department to warn them John Dillinger escaped. Sure, they'd check into it when they found the time. "Excuse me?" Volk sprinted from the garage to the court building and shouted at the vigilantes lingering out front. "Dillinger's escaped!" One of the volunteers snapped, "You're nuts! Get out of here! You've got to be kidding me!" Volk saw Deputy Prosecutor Floyd Vance walking to his office and yelled, "Dillinger's escaped!" "Is that right? Jeez Louise! Can't you hear all the hollering over at the jail?" Vance heard something, and when no one answered the jail's front door, he went in through the back. Then he heard the jailers yelling, but the master keys had left the building, and so the steel door had to be opened with a torch. By now, John Dillinger had a 10-minute head start. Meanwhile, John Udick snuck out of the kitchen and went to Sheriff Lillian Hawley's quarters above the jail. The woman had been working around the clock since Dillinger's arrival and was catching up on some Z's. Udick told her that her worst nightmare was real. Hawley got dressed, and as she angrily strapped on a pistol, she hissed, "If I ever see John Dillinger, I'll shoot him through the head with my own gun." Everyone moved fast. They didn't know the Ford's license plate number, but figured it out by adding and subtracting the numbers of the license plates of the other police cars in the motor pool. Deputy Sheriff Carol Hawley then sent out an alert to all law enforcement and beyond, 679-929. Listeners, it was the wrong number. It was actually 674-549. Law enforcement in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Missouri, New York, Oklahoma, and Arizona went on high alert. Indiana and Illinois Highway Police set up a joint headquarters in Bradley, Illinois, and stopped and searched all suspicious cars. Pennsylvania state troopers were ordered to pin a copy of the escapees' mugshot on their cars' visors. The nation's banks were told to be prepared. On the day of the escape at 7:15 a.m., John Dillinger's lawyer, Lewis Pickett, and his investigator, Arthur O'Leary, sat in the lawyer's office in Chicago waiting by the phone. For some reason. It was Saturday. All the courts were closed. A little later, John Dillinger's sweetheart, Billy Frechette, and former fellow inmate Meyer Bogue arrived. Random. At 9:30 a.m., Pickett received a phone call from his nephew, Bob Allen. News stations were reporting that John Dillinger escaped from Crown Point Jail. Pickett casually phoned Warden Baker for confirmation. "Hello, Mr. Baker. This is Lou Pickett in Chicago." "Yes, hello, Lou. What truth is there in the radio report that my client just broke jail?" "That's right. He just left us. Anybody killed or hurt?" "Nope, nobody was hurt." "That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Say, he didn't leave any forwarding address, did he?" "Nope, he didn't say where he was going, but I can guess." "That's a hell of a client to have." "Well, Pickett, give him my regards when you see him today." Pickett hung up the phone. Billy shrieked, "My golly, it's true, he got away." Then, "Poor Johnny, they'll kill him. Oh my God, they'll kill him." Pickett told her, "Quit your squawking. They'll never get another look at his coattails." Bogue went out to get all the newspaper extra editions and booze to celebrate. By 11 a.m., lightweight Billy was passed out drunk on the couch. Pickett asked his former employee and ex-girlfriend Esther Anderson if she could put up a client of his at her home at Wellington Avenue. He sent Billy over and followed soon after. O'Leary and Bogue remained at the office waiting for Dillinger to call and give instructions. At Esther's place, the lady recognized Billy and realized that Pickett had set her up. She told them to leave. Pickett parked Billy in the building's lobby to wait for her beau to appear. Meanwhile, the two escapees and their two hostages in the fort zigzagged their merry way toward Illinois along gravel roads in the pouring rain. John Dillinger was very calm and deliberate, telling Ernie Blunk to keep going 40 miles an hour. He tossed the keys from the county jail from the car and showed Blunk the wooden gun. "Do you think it was this that did it?" Blunk said, "If I knew then what I know now, you wouldn't be getting away with it." At St. John's, Dillinger opened the glove box and found a few shotgun shells and a pair of handcuffs. "This was a police car." "Yeah, it's the sheriff's car." Dillinger thought it was hilarious. "Was there something on the car to show it was a cop car?" "Yeah, a red light in the front bumper." After passing through St. John's, Dillinger had Blunk pull over, and he sent Sager out to twist off the conspicuous light. John was having a whale of a time, cheerfully singing The Last Roundup, repeating the line, "Get along, little doggy, get along." In between verses, he asked his involuntary carpool buddies if they'd like to see St. Louis. Blunk growled that they were in no position to argue. Every time they came across parked cars, Dillinger gestured for Youngblood to lay low, because a black man in a fancy car at that time would attract police attention. 23 miles west of Crown Point, Dillinger told Blunk to turn south onto a dirt road, which the rain had transformed into a mudslide. Blunk struggled to keep the car going straight. Dillinger told him to shift into second gear, but Blunk hit the brakes and drove the car into a water-filled ditch. Dillinger, still cool as a cucumber, was like, "So, any chains on board?" Sager fished a pair from the rear floorboard. "Yep." Johnny ordered everyone out while Sager and Youngblood pushed the car out of the ditch. Putting on the chains without a jack took a long time, but Dillinger was in no hurry. The foursome was back on the road 40 minutes later. Blunk ventured, "I suppose you'll be going to Lima to bust your men out of jail." Dillinger replied, "They'd do as much for me." Then, John Dillinger crossed state lines in a stolen car. At Lily's Corner, near Peatone, Illinois, John Dillinger noticed there were no telephone poles and therefore no telephones nearby. He told Blunk to pull over. "I think I'll get rid of you fellas here. Heart attacks all around." Dillinger said he understood they'd called the sheriff. "You guys do whatever you have to do, but I can tell you, that's the last jail I'll ever be in." With that, Dillinger shook hands and offered Blunk and Sager $4, to Uber home. He apologized he couldn't give more. Blunk declined, but Sager, who carried no cash, accepted the bills. Then John grinned at the hostages standing on the road and said, "I'll remember you at Christmas, keep your noses clean." He slid behind the wheel of the Ford and waved as he and Youngblood drove off in the direction of Chicago, some 20 miles due north. At 11:30 a.m., Blunk and Sager hitched a ride to Peatone and called a deputy sheriff. The alarm was raised and a posse was pulled together fast. Dillinger and Youngblood had about a 15-minute head start. Deputy Blunk and Mechanic Sager eventually returned to Crown Point and were welcomed by a sea of reporters and officials, all eager to interview them. Blunk said, "I was never scared of Dillinger. I knew he wouldn't hurt me. He was too nice for that." However, in later testimonies, Dillinger became scarier, more foul-mouthed, and more evil. Judging by the transcripts, it's obvious the investigators were highly skeptical of Blunk's version of events. They figured he was in on it. Sheriff Hawley questioned the pair, muttering that the whole thing was too ridiculous for words. When Prosecutor Estill, whose political career was already toast, arrived, he immediately issued arrest orders for Blunk and Cahoon. He declared, "From what I hear, it seems strange that Dillinger didn't serve tea to the guards." By early afternoon, March 3, 1934, news of John Dillinger's baffling escape was leading every radio broadcast from coast to coast and around the world. Afternoon newspapers slapped the story in huge headlines on their front pages. The Times called it a daring escape that rivals the exploits of the heroes of Wild West thrillers. Most readers were in awe of the man who simply walked out of the jail with a fake gun and marveled at his audacity of making his getaway in the sheriff's own car. Reports of Dillinger's sightings poured into the Indiana State Police headquarters every 5 minutes, by phone, telegraph, mail, and in person. He was seen in Ohio, New York, Florida, Texas, Michigan, Missouri, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Washington, D.C. He was disguised as an army officer, a coal miner, a farmer, and a nun. Basically, anyone with a cleft chin was Dillinger. They were chasing a ghost. Meanwhile, the citizens of Lima, Ohio, freaked out. Surely Dillinger was headed their way with a horde to storm the jail and break out his buddies. Inmates Harry Pierpont, Charles Makeley, and Russell Clark had been lounging in their cells in their PJs when they overheard a snippet from the radio in the sheriff's office. Dillinger was out. Their moods lifted and they quickly changed into their street clothes, ready for their liberation. However, the trio was all dressed up with no place to go. Dillinger, with Youngblood lying on the back seat, had gone in the opposite direction and circled the outskirts of Chicago, Illinois for over an hour, as the outlaw saw his face popping up at every newsstand he passed. Meanwhile, in Mooresville, Indiana, John Dillinger Sr. was getting supplies when Mrs. Moore, wife of the Mooresville Times editor, told him about his son's escape. He was stunned. "What? Escaped? How? Is he all right?" Mrs. Moore told him what she knew. John Sr. alternated between smiles and tears. "Well, it makes a fellow feel a little better, but of course they may catch him. Guess I'll start listening to the radio again now. When he was out before, that's all I did when I wasn't working." The father in him couldn't quite hide his pride. Well, he was pretty tricky. He is no fool. Dillinger was no fool, but he had made a mistake. The outlaw, confident and relaxed, had driven a highly recognizable stolen car across state lines and violated the Dyer Act, or National Motor Vehicle Theft Act. Once they found the car and a warrant was issued for his arrest, he'd become a federal fugitive. At 3 p.m., the phone in Lou Pickett's office finally rang. Art O'Leary picked up. John Dillinger spoke, only 4 words. "Where will I go?" "Go to 434 Wellington Avenue. Pickett will be waiting." O'Leary hung up. It was risky mentioning an address over the phone, but fingers crossed the police hadn't placed a wiretap yet. Meanwhile, police detective Lorimer Hyde was driving home when he saw a black Ford with Indiana license plates. "Wait, isn't that John Dillinger?" The license plate number was wrong, but Hyde went in pursuit. Dillinger floored it. "Yep, that's him." The chase was on. Both cars raced through Chicago traffic until Dillinger slammed the brakes and pointed a machine gun straight at Hyde. The detective backed off fast. He needed reinforcements. John, entirely unfazed, drove right up to the front door of the Wellington Avenue address. He saw Pickett outside leaning against the building and waved, "Hiya, counsel." This wasn't where he'd stay, but the lawyer led Dillinger inside to reunite with Billy. She threw herself in Johnny's arms for a passionate but hurried reunion. Billy suggested they'd crash at her half-sister, Frances Patsy Schultz's place. Since law enforcement knew nothing about Billy, it'd be safe for now. Dillinger told Pickett to meet him there that evening and give him whatever money he had. The lawyer handed him $300. Meanwhile, Detective Hyde had rounded up some men, and by the time Dillinger got moving again, Chicago's north side was swarming with police. Still, Dillinger drove through town unseen and dropped off Youngblood at a streetcar stop with $100 and 2 pistols. Detective Hyde was just about to give up when he spotted the black Ford again. This time, there was a woman in the front seat. The chase was on. Again. Dillinger, one hand on the steering wheel, a machine gun in the other, merged in and out of traffic. Dead ahead, a stopped streetcar letting off passengers blocked his way. Detective Hyde hit the brakes. Sure, he had Johnny trapped, but Dillinger didn't slow down. Swerved into the oncoming traffic, deftly veered around the cars, and disappeared. Hyde admitted defeat. The chase was over. Johnny and Billy arrived at Patsy's building. Dillinger entered through a side door, but veteran speed demon Billy took the Ford and parked it 3 miles away in front of a house in North Chicago. O'Leary gave her a ride back to her sister's apartment. That evening, Pickett and O'Leary arrived, and Dillinger emerged from the kitchen with the wooden gun in one hand and a real one in the other, laughing. Johnny sat on the davenport in the living room with Billy cuddled in his arms and gave a colorful recital of his escape from Crown Point. And nervous Patsy was in the kitchen with her roommate, downing a case of beer. After about an hour, Pickett talked business. "Say, Dillinger, when am I gonna see some money? I haven't had $1 yet, you know." "What? His former lawyer, Joseph Ryan, hadn't given him the $500? Get that son of a bitch on the phone, Mr. Pickett. Tell him I said he better cough up that dough and quick." On Sunday afternoon, the day after, O'Leary tracked down Ryan and told him he had 1 hour to pay or else Dillinger would find him. Ryan beat town and was never seen again. The director of the Bureau of Investigation, J. Edgar Hoover, decreed when he heard of the outbreak, "It's a damnable outrage. Someone is either guilty of nonfeasance or malfeasance. Either negligence or corruption must be at the bottom of this." It was clear the Bureau of Investigation was absolutely necessary to fight such corruption and incompetence. Mere hours after the escape, Hoover called the special agent in charge of the Chicago field office, 30-year-old Melvin Purvis. He could tell him nothing. But John Dillinger's home base was in Chicago. How come the Chicago field office had so few underworld contacts? Why didn't Purvis have an army of paid snitches who knew where Dillinger was hanging out? Because you never told me to get involved in the Dillinger case or start a file on the man, like, ever? Well, you better start now. Chicago Police Captain John Steege reassembled the 40-man Dillinger squad and fumed. How in the name of common sense could a prisoner go through 6 barred doors to freedom? Now bright and early Monday, Dillinger will rob a bank to get funds. Then when he gets together with John Hamilton, the two of them will raid a police station someplace and get guns and ammunition. And then maybe they'll come back to Chicago for another game of tag. What's the use of arresting Dillinger if we can't keep him in jail? I'm sending squads all over the city to nab him. But even if we do get him, it'll probably be the same thing all over again. I'm disgusted. We'll find him if he's in Chicago, and when we do, he'll never go back to Indiana. Except maybe in a box. Ira McDowell, Chicago's acting police commissioner, piled on. If Dillinger sticks his head inside Chicago, he'll be shot on sight. Those are my orders. Chicago Mayor Edward J. Kelly added, "I'm sick about it. It couldn't have happened in Chicago. Dillinger won't come here because he knows it's too hot for him." Yeah, well, at this particular time, Dillinger was in Chicago, just chilling with his babe at her sister's place. Just saying. The general public considered the whole escape one big joke and devoured the spectacular tales of John Dillinger's jail walkout. It was a welcome relief during the dark days of the Depression. Crown Point was now dubbed Clown Point and turned into a tourist attraction overnight, with 1,500 cars driving up on Sunday to retrace Dillinger's historic steps between the back of the jail and the Main Street garage. The recently released Mary Kinder, whose boyfriend Harry Pierpont remained imprisoned, told reporters, "Of course, I'm glad Johnny got away. I'm tickled to death. The whole United States is glad. Everybody was for him." Well, not everybody, but few could deny the hardened criminal had style. According to the Gary Post-Tribune, he was a carefree devil with many likable traits, and concluded that most believe that any guy with nerve like Dillinger's deserves all he can get. The Nevada State Journal felt bad for law enforcement, but argued any man with a drop of sporting blood in his veins got a kick out of the almost absurd situation. It was good and all, but maybe if he just disappeared, that would be nice. Like most men who read of his daring and cunning, we wish there were some way for him to end up in Borneo, Siam, Guatemala, or Iceland, so he wouldn't harass our peace officers anymore. Interestingly, most papers refer to Dillinger as a farm boy who left his humble origins to become the country's most notorious criminal. As you may recall, John Dillinger was a city slicker until he was 19 when his father bought a farm. Even then, he continued to work in Indianapolis. The guy wasn't even farm boy material, he had hay fever. The Chicago Defender, the U.S.'s foremost African-American newspaper, also had a few things to say about the escape and created a fictional story to poke fun at America's obsession with race. Dillinger had violated the long-established custom of America's social scheme and insisted on taking with him Herbert Youngblood, a gentleman of darker hue. They noted the irony of Youngblood expanding the list of Black American accomplishments. They were rising in industry, the arts, science, technology, and athletics, and now jailbreaks as well. Federal, state, local, and private investigators spent thousands of hours and thousands of dollars trying to get answers about John Dillinger's jailbreak, but they only ended up with more questions. Guards, cops, gangsters, witnesses, lawyers, and politicians all spun their tales to protect themselves or others. Most eyewitnesses only had a limited view of the situation, and the man with the most complete experience, Ernest Blunk, constantly changed his story until it was an incoherent mess. Ultimately, everyone believed what suited them, politically or career-wise. But the hunt for scapegoats began, and it was open season. As one reporter put it, Dillinger's wooden gun was loaded with political dynamite, and it exploded all over the state and beyond. The Republicans blamed Indiana's Democrat Governor Paul McNutt for paroling John Dillinger, which had started the dominoes falling. McNutt, who immediately ordered a full investigation, blamed Republicans for leaving him with the mess. It was Judge Joseph Williams, a Republican, who had given the harsh sentence to young Dillinger. The judge and the prosecutor took him out and told him if he would tell certain things, they would let him off with a lighter sentence. They didn't keep their word. This made a criminal out of him. That was the first domino. U.S. Attorney General Homer Cummings blamed Mrs. Hawley, the woman sheriff, and prosecutor Robert Estill and their stupid photo shoot. Hardline conservatives demanded that Lake County hire a real, that is, male sheriff. Sheriff Hawley said, "I'm not a sissy, I can take it on the chin, but I feel that I'm getting the blame for this just because I'm a woman." Hollywood film star and social commentator Will Rogers observed in his syndicated column, "You can't blame that woman sheriff so much after all, because she thought she was depending on men." Mrs. Hawley stepped down in April and never spoke of it again for the rest of her life, which is saying something. She passed away in 1994, aged 103. Lake County prosecutor Robert Estill, dead man walking, blamed Judge William Murray for not moving Dillinger to the Indiana State Prison when he told him to. Team Wisconsin, who had been cheated out of hosting the terror gang in their state, were like, rewind. Prosecutor John Brown had warned them in Tucson. Indiana State, which turned these mobsters loose on the Middle West, has Dillinger in custody again. It is hoped that the negligence of the officer of that state will never be repeated. Well, repeated. The Sheboygan Press blamed everybody, the legal officials who coddled criminals, the crooked judges, the politically minded parole boards that released them, and the attorneys who misled juries, bribed judges, and manipulated witnesses. Anyone else with 2 cents? 47 cents today? What about Johnny's visitors? Joseph Ryan, Lewis Pickett, Art O'Leary, Meyer Bogue, Hubert Dillinger, and the mysterious Mrs. Dillinger. Pickett said that Dillinger's wife, known to him as Billy, and Dillinger had vanished after the escape. I don't ever expect to hear from him because he owes me money. He probably figured me for as big a sucker as anyone. However, Pickett claimed Dillinger had seen the light and would never rob a bank again. He was going to travel the path of righteousness and give the balance of his life in this world to God. Meyer Bogue used his newfound infamy to earn some money. He turned Indiana State Police informant for $15 a day. In the week following Dillinger's escape, Robert Estill bypassed Indiana State Police Captain Matt Leach and claimed jurisdiction over the investigation. 3 questions needed to be answered. Had there been inside help? Had there been outside help? And was the gun really made of wood, or was a real gun smuggled inside? The Bureau of Investigation ultimately settled the last question. It was a wooden gun that Dillinger used to get real guns. Once the man had real guns, there was no stopping him. Where did the fake gun come from? Had Dillinger carved it, as he claimed, using a piece of a washboard, the handle of a razor, and some shoe polish? He'd left evidence all over the place that he had, but O'Leary said he had it made in a Chicago wood shop, and that Meyer Bogue smuggled it inside on March 2nd. Several people were bribed for a total of $11,000, but who received these payments remained unknown. However, the fingerprints of certain corrupt East Chicago cops and politicians were all over it. Part of the bribe money was fronted by Homer Van Meter and Lester Gillis, aka Babyface Nelson, and was delivered by Nelson gang member Tommy Carroll. Dillinger had promised to pay them back after their first bank robbery together. Amid all the finger-pointing, saintly Johnny stayed in the apartment all Sunday and checked in with John Hamilton, who told him the Nelson gang was ready and waiting for him. Early Sunday evening, Tommy Carroll pulled up in front of the building in a dark green Ford. Johnny and Billy, with machine guns under their coats, rushed out of a side entrance carrying suitcases and ducked into the back seat. The trio arrived in St. Paul, Minnesota the next morning. St. Paul, with its corrupt police force, was a popular hangout for criminals, but Dillinger felt safer in Minneapolis and had another Nelson associate, Eugene Eddie Green, rent him an apartment on South Girard Avenue as Mr. and Mrs. Olson. A nearly recovered John Hamilton and his girlfriend Pat Charrington moved in that afternoon. The girls went out to shop for supplies at Stillman's Grocery, the Barker Karpus gang's store of choice. John Dillinger's Crown Point escape had a huge impact, not only on law enforcement and politicians, but everyone. The Indianapolis Council of Women demanded a ban on the manufacture, sale, and interstate imports of wooden and fake pistols. Such unwholesome toys only caused children to play at being gunmen and gangsters. Just days after the Crown Point fiasco, Paramount Studios announced it would produce a movie based on Dillinger's life. But William Hayes, president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, declared that any company that dared to make a Dillinger film would be frozen out of theaters. No motion picture based on the life or exploits of John Dillinger will be produced, distributed, or exhibited by any company member. This decision is based on the belief that such a picture would be detrimental to the best public interest. Hayes blamed the epidemic of gangster films, which only glorified lawbreakers and belittled cops, when instead, law-abiding citizens of all ages should sympathize with law enforcement because our social system and its improvement depend on it. Most Americans did sympathize with the police, but couldn't help being fascinated with John Dillinger. But ever since the Supreme Court ruling in 1915 that motion pictures didn't have freedom of speech, Hollywood developed a set of guidelines for self-censorship, hoping to avoid government censorship. The Motion Picture Production Code, aka the Hayes Code, came into full effect a few months later in June. But some filmmakers still managed to sneak in some Dillingerisms, as we'll see. The Hayes Code was dropped in 1968 and replaced with the current MPAA film rating system, G to NC-17. As Captain John Steege predicted, John Dillinger, badly in need of cash, wanted to hop on the bank robbing train straight away. But he needed a new gang. However, he was so hot, everyone gave him a wide berth, and he couldn't afford to be picky. Of course, his first lieutenant was the reckless John Hamilton, and the duo basically joined Babyface Nelson's gang with Homer Van Meter, expert machine gunner Tommy Carroll, and jug marker Eddie Green. Born in Chicago to Belgian immigrant parents, Lester Gillis was a small man with an innocent boyish face and a downright vicious temper. In his younger years, he stole cars for thrills and chrome for profit. After serving 2 terms in the St. Charles School for Boys, he joined the strippers. No. A tire theft ring. In 1927, he was caught during such a tire robbery, found guilty, and given a year's probation. Lester tried going straight and got a job as a delivery man, a car salesman, and then assembling stoves, which was hard and dirty work. But the police brought him in for questioning every time there was a burglary or a robbery, and because of this, he was missing work too often, always on the verge of being fired. According to his mom, this police harassment made him choose a career in crime. In 1928, he married a 16-year-old dime store salesgirl, Helen Wawrzyniak, whom he got knocked up. They eloped and eventually had 2 kids. However, he was often seen with other women. He started hanging out with former associates again and took up bank robbing. Babyface wasn't afraid of a bit of ultra-violence, and his bank robberies were messy affairs which more often than not had lethal outcomes. Around this time, he changed his name from Lester Gillis to George Nelson. We don't know why. In 1931, the Chicago outfit, Al Capone's mob, had a bone to pick with Nelson for some reason, probably for not sharing a cut with the mob for crimes committed in their area. The outfit snitched to the cops about a recent rash of jewelry robberies and gave them his location. On February 14, 1931, police raided his apartment and lifted a groggy Nelson from his bed. He refused to take a plea deal and was sentenced 1 year to life and sent to Illinois State Prison. However, Nelson escaped when he returned from a trial for another bank robbery in Wheaton, Illinois. Either his sister Leona or his wife Helen hit a .45 in the restroom of the train taking him back to prison. And while in a taxi driving to the prison, he used a retrieved gun to knock the cab driver and the police guard out. Nelson, knowing the outfit had put a hit on him, fled west. In 1933, after a stint of bootlegging in California under the name Jimmy, he returned to the Midwest because he wanted to join a big-time bank-robbing gang. But the Barker Karpis gang had no openings, and Nelson ended up creating his own gang. Nelson had already met John Dillinger during his Whitecap gang days to discuss train robbery plans, but dismissed the Whitecappers as too immature. Now, the 24-year-old Nelson welcomed the experienced Dillinger, who'd bring his gang instant fame, respect, and prestige. Jimmy dug the idea of being the boss of the nation's most wanted bank robber. Dillinger didn't mind the subordinate role. He was just grateful Nelson would take him in. However, what Nelson hadn't counted on, and would soon regret, was that once Johnny teamed up with him, everyone, press, police, politicians, and public, referred to his men as the new or second Dillinger Gang. It's unclear if Johnny was aware he was teaming up with a trigger-happy psychopath. The night Dillinger arrived in the Twin Cities, Nelson cut off a man in traffic, and when the man had the audacity to confront him, Jimmy shot and killed him. By the way, no one called Nelson Babyface to his face. He despised that name. They generally called him Jimmy. The Nelson gang was ready to go and rob a bank in Sioux Falls, South Dakota the next day, and Dillinger wanted in. Johnny suggested using the Baron Lom technique, which had served him well, but Nelson was like, too complicated. He just entered the front door, shooting. Van Meter cracked up, "Sure, buddy," and Nelson jumped down his throat. But Dillinger's charm and calm disarmed both men. These tempers worried John. But that was next week's problem. Today, he needed cash to pay back his loans, have some spending money, and fund the jailbreak for Pierpont, Makeley, and Clark. Meanwhile, in Chicago on March 5th at 2:30 p.m., Sheriff Holly's Ford was discovered, 2 days after it had been abandoned. The state of Illinois issued a warrant for interstate car thief John Dillinger's arrest. Shortly after 10 a.m. on March 6, 1934, at police headquarters in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, the desk sergeant took a call from the alarm company. There was trouble at the Security National Bank and Trust Company a block away. The dispatcher failed to mention that the alarm was ringing and didn't specify what kind of trouble. Chief of Police M.W. Parsons and Detective F.C. White figured some drunk was bothering the customers, took only their pistols, and headed for the bank. Melvin Sells, sheriff of Minnehaha County, was in his office at the courthouse talking to reporter Sue Botham when the phone rang. A man asked if he had any guns. Sells, thinking it was a joke, "Yeah, I got a few. Better bring 'em up to 9th and Main." The man hung up. Sells thought it was a prank caller, but he grabbed a machine gun and handed the reporter a shotgun. "Let's give that practical joker a scare." The reporter was like, how do you work this thing?" However, there was no drunk causing trouble, and there was no prank. The bank was being robbed. A few minutes earlier, stenographer Don Lovejoy looked out the bank's side window to see 5 men in hats, in coats with upturned collars, emerge from a green double-parked Packard. That's how bank robberies start. He prepared to hit the alarm. Eddie Green and the driver stayed with the car, Tommy Carroll was the lookout at the front door, and 3 others entered the bank. In a split second, one of them pulled his machine gun and shrieked, "This is a holdup! Lay on the floor!" Babyface Nelson. As the other 2 quickly lined up the employees, Lovejoy smashed the alarm bell, alerting the phone operator. Nelson went crazy. He fumed at the herded-up employees. "I'd like to know who the hell set off that alarm. Which one of you bastards did that? If you want to get killed, just make another dumb move." Seconds later, Lovejoy stared down the barrel of Nelson's machine gun. "I'm gonna kill the man who hit the alarm, and you and I know you did it." Lovejoy tried to convince him that it wasn't him. Look, that little thingy would be down, not up. The stenographer was grateful for a very calm bank robber who intervened and told Nelson to forget it and get the money. John Dillinger. John collected all the money from head teller Robert Dargan and teller Leo Olson's cages and demanded someone open the money vault. No one volunteered. Dillinger asked who had the combination. No one volunteered, until bank president China Clark emerged from his office, alarmed by all the ruckus. 6 fingers pointed at him. Heck, he didn't know the combination. Dillinger kicked the bankers behind. "Then give me someone who does." Dargan was like, "Don't point at me, don't point at me, don't point at me." Clark pointed at him. "Dang it!" Dillinger seized the head teller and dragged him to the vault. Dargan was so nervous that he couldn't get the complicated 5-way combination of the money vault right, and the nervous guy jamming a machine gun in his side wasn't helping. Homer Van Meter. At last, the vault door swung open, and Van Meter grabbed some $14,000. The second vault was on a time lock and only contained bonds, according to Dargan. No matter how much the gangsters hollered and threatened, no one could open it. Outside the bank, a curious crowd of Sioux Falls residents, reporters, and beat cops started to gather to watch the bank robbery in progress, as if they were watching a parade. Meanwhile, Eddie Green directed traffic to keep drivers moving, while Tommy Carroll fired his machine gun over everyone's heads to keep the crowds back. Carroll ran up to Officer Homer Powers standing near the city drugstore, grabbed him, and forced him to stand facing the bank wall with his hands up. Off-duty motorcycle cop Hale Keith, noticing the growing crowd around the bank, parked his car to check it out. But the moment Keith got out of his car, there was a quick rat-tat-tat from inside the bank, shattering a window. Keith caught a flock of bullets and went down, severely injured, but he lived. Inside the bank, Babyface Nelson hopped off the desk and shouted, "I got one of the cops! I got one of them!" Dillinger rolled his eyes. Another cop pulled up to the bank, fingerprint technician Roy Donahoe. Tommy welcomed him with a shot to his tire and forced him to join the line. Right behind the fingerprint man, Chief Parsons and Detective White arrived. Carroll had them covered. "Hands up and join the line, you two." One of the robbers, hearing all the gunfire, shouted from inside, "Everything okay out there?" Carroll looked over at the cops lined up against the bank wall and yelled back that everything was under control. Sheriff Sells arrived next, ready to take on the Joker. Because of the massive crowd gathered around the bank building, he had to park his car several blocks away. That must be a heck of a fight. But then, he saw a guy standing in the middle of the interurban tracks, waving a machine gun, and a line of police officers against the bank wall. "Oh, this is serious." Sells ran into the Lincoln Hotel and charged up the stairs to the second floor to get a better vantage point. The reporter followed on his heels. When someone in the hotel shouted that the bank robbers had shot a cop and the gang was preparing to leave, Sells yelled at Shoebotham to bring the car around. Inside the bank, the robbers were just about done, and Dillinger and crew started gathering all the hostages. Nelson figured that since he hadn't entered the bank guns blazing, he'd exit it guns blazing, and shut the glass out of the front door. Carol swung around. What the? A giant blob of customers and employees poured out of the bank. His associates were in there somewhere. Probably. Tommy and Eddie hustled into the car while Jimmy picked 4 female clerks and teller Leo Olson to stand on the running boards of the 7-passenger Packard. The gangsters rolled down the windows and grabbed the arms of their human shields so they wouldn't jump off. One of the bandits said, "Don't be afraid, we don't intend to hurt you." Patrolman Harley Chrisman arrived on foot just as the car started to move. He ducked into a Maxwell hardware store, commandeered a hunting rifle, and slammed in some cartridges. He slid into a basement stairwell, took aim, and fired into the front of the approaching Packard. Bullseye! He shot the radiator. The big car rolled 300 yards and stopped. The gangsters debated should they get another vehicle. No time. The car turned west, but after a block, the motor sputtered, and the Packard rolled to a stop. The hostages jumped off the running boards. When one of the women took off, one of the robbers fired a shot in the air and yelled, "Come back here!" Everyone hopped back on. Somehow, the Packard restarted and took off. Slowly. Sheriff Sells in his car with reporter Shoebotham riding shotgun caught up with the crippled Packard. Joining them for the chase was another car, with Patrolman Chrisman, Deputy Sheriff Lawrence Green, and U.S. Marshal Art Anderson. They pulled over to have a quick strategy session. They could spare a minute. That Packard was racing out of town at 25 miles an hour. Sheriff Sells then ditched Shoebotham, and within a few miles, the 2 police cars caught up with the bandit car. When they hit Route 77, the main road south, Dillinger told the driver to stop so they could drop some roofing nails on the road. Some think the driver was John Paul Chase, a gopher whom Nelson had met in California, but it was probably John Hamilton. Teller Olson yelled at the gangsters that the girls were freezing. None of them were wearing coats. Dillinger told the ladies to get into the car, though they had to sit on the gangsters' laps. Olson, drenched in sweat, asked, "What about me?" Dillinger told him, "You're through, shorty." Olson stepped on the road thinking he'd be shot, but the car drove off. A couple picked Leo up and returned him to the bank. After 4 more miles, steam billowed from the Packard's hood. A service station attendant noticed and ran out into the street with a fire extinguisher. A gangster yelled, "Get back in there!" and the car sputtered on. When the driver noticed police cars in his rearview mirror, he stopped to let his associates deal with it. Cue machine gun assault. The outlaw shattered Anderson's windshield, destroyed Sells' headlight and hood, and shot up his radiator. The cops, worried about striking the women in the getaway car, backed off. Back on the road, the driver considered taking the old Chevy of a rural carrier, but they were still better off in the Packard with a busted radiator. Or so they thought. 4 miles further down the road, the car seized up. The driver had just enough time to jackknife the Packard across the road and block farmer Alfred Mush's Dodge. Meanwhile, Sheriff Sells hopped into Anderson's car and drove off, and they hit roofing nails. While the cops switched tires, the robbers switched cars. The gangsters transferred gasoline cans from the Packard to the Dodge, leaving the 4 hostage girls standing on the road shivering from the cold and probably fear. Mrs. Farrager, driving along in her Chevy coupe, saw the scene. She caroned, "You girls will catch your death of cold out here without coats." One of the men asked her how much gas was in her car. "Less than a quarter tank." "Never mind." Mrs. Farrager shrugged and wanted to drive off, but one of the crooks yelled, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Farrager was ordered to kill the engine and stay put. Okey-do. John Dillinger told the girls that, sadly, there was no room for them in the Dodge, so long. Just as the men hustled into the Dodge, the 4 lawmen arrived. They stopped a few yards from the 3 parked cars. They saw the robbers scramble into the farmer's Dodge. They saw Nelson try to grab one of the women. They saw Dillinger pull Nelson, kicking and screaming, into the Dodge without the girl, and drive off. Mrs. Farrager also continued on her way, leaving the frozen girls by the road. The lawmen chased the gangsters top speed and no longer having to worry about hostages, fired on the Dodge every time they got in range. Every time the bandits returned fire, the chase crossed into Iowa and then Minnesota, leaving a host of furious car owners with flat tires in their wake. The South Dakota lawmen were forced to abandon the chase around Pipestone, Minnesota. They'd already traveled too deep into another state. However, 2 airplanes continued shadowing the robbers until the gang transferred into a stashed black Lincoln. And, just like that, they were gone. Sells guessed that the crooks were heading for St. Paul, and Chief Parsons alerted the locals. An officer responded, "Don't worry, they won't get by us." Listeners, they did. The bank robbers arrived in Minneapolis around midnight and went up to Eddie Green's apartment to count the money. Babyface Nelson, who'd been whining all the way home that John Dillinger hadn't pulled over to let him get a good shot at the cops, started a fight with Homer Van Meter about who was the MVP of the robbery. Nelson claimed he had saved everyone by shooting Officer Hill Keith through the window, while Van Meter claimed credit for getting the head teller to open the vault. The bickering stopped when Nelson saw Green dividing the money on the table. He grabbed his machine gun. Who the hell did he think he was? Johnny said diplomatically. Let Jimmy count it. Like a petulant child, Nelson piled the money on the floor and methodically divided the $46,000 in 6 heaps. Dillinger thanked Nelson for the opportunity and announced that he would use most of his $7,000 share to fund attorneys for his former gang members. After everyone left, Bessie Green, Eddie's wife, was like, "So, we're gonna need a new apartment?" The evening edition of the Sioux Falls Daily Argus Leader's headline read, "Was it Dillinger?" Several eyewitnesses insisted it was. Others weren't so sure. Leo Olson only identified Babyface Nelson and Homer Van Meter when he was shown their mugshots that night. There was just no way that John Dillinger had robbed a bank 3 states over 3 days after his escape. Captain Matt Leach said, "Dillinger hasn't had time for that job, or I'm badly fooled. That job sounds to me like the work of a Minneapolis gang. His ace hold-up men, Pierpont, Makeley, Clark, Schaus, Copeland, and Crouch, are all in prison. He'll have to have time to mobilize another bad gang. If the Sioux Falls robbery had been pulled next week, I might have suspected Dillinger." Cowboy philosopher Will Rogers wasn't buying it and wrote in his syndicated column, "They had him surrounded in Chicago, but he robbed a bank in Sioux Falls that day, so they was right on his trail, just 3 states behind." It took a while for everyone to figure out that Dillinger was at the job, but John's lawyer Lou Pickett had no doubt. A mystery man dropped off $1,000 courtesy of Johnny at his office the very next day. Bank Corporation's underworld contacts insisted that not only was Dillinger responsible, his new gang was going to strike another bank in the same area soon. Banks in Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa were warned. The contacts were correct. Dillinger was planning another robbery in Mason City, Iowa. Find out in the next episode. See you there.